The steel door slammed shut with a sound that echoed like a hammer, hitting the inside of your skull. Boom! It was a kind of sound you don't forget, the kind you feel in your bones. It was February 14th, 2011, inside the Pelican Bay State Prison Security Housing Unit. The SHU, the place inmates call the end of the world. Inside cell 142, a man named Miguel Shadow, Ramirez pressed his ear against the concrete wall, so hard it scraped his skin. His heart was racing. He heard something no one is supposed to hear inside Pelican Bay's SHU. A whisper, a voice faintly leaking through a ventilation shaft. A voice that said, "Shadow, they're coming for you tonight." Shadow stepped back, staring at the vent like it was alive. In the SHU, inmates spent 23 hours a day locked in concrete. No phone calls, no human touch, no sunlight except what slipped in through the tiny metal grate in the ceiling. So hearing a voice, a real voice, didn't feel possible. But then he heard it again, clearer this time. "Tonight, stay awake." He froze. His breathing grew shallow. And that's when the lights in the tier flickered once, twice, then went completely dark. Total blackout. The entire SHU, a place already built to break a person, was now silent, pitch black, and pulsing with the kind of dread no human mind is built to handle. Shadow whispered into the darkness. "Who's there? What do you want?" Nothing. Just the deep hum of the prison generators struggling to turn back on. Then a loud metallic scrape, right outside his door. The kind of sound that tells you someone or something is inches away. And right as he leaned forward, try to make out what was making the noise. A hand slipped under his cell door. Not a guard's hand. Not an inmate's hand. A hand covered in something wet. Something that smelled like rust and earth. Shadow staggered backward, slamming into the wall. "Who's there? Show yourself." No answer. Just a hand slowly sliding back into the darkness. The lights flickered once more, and then, click, everything snapped back on. The tier was empty. No one was there, but the floor outside his cell, the floor had footprints leading away, and each one of them was stained a deep, dark red. To understand what Shadow saw that night, you need to understand where he was, and why Pelican Bay's SHU has a reputation that chills even the toughest inmates to their core. Pelican Bay State Prison was opened in 1989, designed from the ground up to isolate the most dangerous individuals in the California prison system. The SHU, the Security Housing Unit, was built like a fortress inside a fortress. Guard described as a prison where the sun never enters. Each cell was 8 feet by 10 feet, made of poured concrete, with no windows to the outside world. Inmates were allowed no phone calls, no contact visits, and no group programs. Just 23 hours a day alone, and 1 hour in a concrete yard the size of a small garage. The only sky you see is a thin stretch through a metal grate. Miguel Shadow Ramirez had been placed in the SHU under a rule California used at the time, gang validation. Not for committing a new crime, not for attacking anyone inside, but because investigators believed he had ties to the Mexican mafia. Whether he did or not didn't matter. Once you were validated, Pelican Bay's SHU became your new home. And for many, that meant years, even decades in near total isolation. Shadow's first year inside cell 142 felt like the world had shrunk. He talked to himself to keep his mind sharp, counted cracks in the floor, memorized the pattern of the bolts on his steel door, listened for the distant rumble of the kitchen carts, just to remember what movement sounded like. When new inmates arrived, the SHU sometimes felt electric for a moment. New voices, new energy, but that faded fast, replaced by silence so thick it felt alive. Some nights, Shadow swore the walls breathed with him. Other nights, his ears picked up whispers he couldn't explain. Echoes traveling through the ventilation system, bouncing down the corridors like trapped memories. Then came October 2010, for months before the blackout. That was when Shadow first learned a strange truth about the SHU. The isolation doesn't just punish your body, it rearranges your mind. It began when an older inmate named Hector Bones Delgado managed to pass a note under Shadow's door using a handmade fishing line, A weighted string inmates slide across the floor to trade messages between cells. The note read, "You hearing them yet?" Shadow wrote back, "Hearing who?" Bones' reply took hours to slide back across the concrete. The ones on the other side of the walls. Shadow didn't know what he meant, but over the next few weeks, he started noticing things. Whispers with no source. Footsteps in the tier when guards were nowhere around. The sound of someone tapping on the pipes, always in sets of 3. It was easy to blame it on stress, on the SHU, on isolation. But then rumors spread that an inmate in another pod had been found sitting in the corner of his cell, eyes wide open, insisting a voice inside the vent was reading his thoughts. Shadow didn't believe it, didn't want to believe it, until the night of January 23rd, 2011, when he woke up and realized someone had written something on his cell door. A single message scratched into the steel. "You're next." Guards didn't know who did it. Cameras showed nothing. That was the day Shadow stopped sleeping deeply. The day he started listening, really listening, to the sounds inside the SHU. And that's when he realized something terrifying. There were patterns. There were rhythms. The voices weren't random. By the time the February 14th blackout came, the night you saw on the hook, Shadow had spent weeks feeling like the SHU itself was watching him. And that night, right after the lights snapped back on and the bloody footprints vanished into the hallway, he heard a loud thump above his cell, like something heavy landing right on the ventilation duct. He froze, looked up. The metal above him rattled twice, and then a slow, dragging sound crawled across the ceiling. Shadow whispered, "No, not again." Then the entire cell went silent. Dead silent, until, bang, something slammed the vent from inside. And this time, it whispered his name. Shadow didn't move, not an inch. His eyes were locked on the shaking metal vent above him as the whisper rolled through his cell like a cold wind slipping under a door. For a moment, he wondered if he was dreaming, but the sting of the concrete under his bare feet reminded him this was real. The SHU wasn't a place where dreams played games. Everything here felt too sharp, too heavy, too close to the bone. He pressed his back to the wall and tried to control his breathing. In Pelican Bay's SHU, the ventilation system connected dozens of cells, weaving through the unit like a hidden highway of metal. Inmates used it to pass messages. But what Shadow heard didn't sound like a message. It sounded like someone was inside the duct itself, crawling, moving, dragging their weight from one cell to another, whispering as they went. Shadow had lived in isolation long enough to understand his mind could twist sounds into something else. But this was too physical, too precise. Even the guards had reacted during the blackout. Moments earlier, Shadow had heard them shouting, boots slamming down the concrete corridor, radios crackling with static. Something was happening outside his cell, something big enough to send staff scrambling. For a second, the vent stayed silent. Then a gentle, rhythmic tapping began. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. It was the same pattern Bones had warned him about months earlier. The pattern nobody could explain. Shadow's jaw tightened. "Bones," he whispered through the vent. "You awake? You hearing this?" No answer. The tapping grew louder. Shadow took a step forward, staring up at the vent like it was nice staring back at him. He whispered, "If there's someone up there, say something." The response was immediate. "They put me here, and they forgot me." Shadow's chest tightened. The voice was low, raspy, cracking like dry wood. Not a voice he recognized. Not a voice he wanted to recognize. Before he could respond, the entire unit erupted in noise. Guards yelling, the metallic slam of a cell door somewhere down the corridor, keys jingling, footsteps rushing in multiple directions. Something was unfolding outside, something bigger than a blackout, a disturbance, an emergency. Pelican Bay's SHU didn't have many of those, but when they happened, they were never small. The voice in the vent suddenly cut off. Shadow strained to listen, but all he heard was chaos echoing through the walls. Then, through the noise, he picked up the sound of a nurse shouting, "Get him stable! Get him stable!" This didn't make sense. SHU inmates never had contact with medical staff unless it was planned, controlled, and guarded. For a nurse to be yelling inside the unit during a blackout meant something had gone wrong, very wrong. Shadow stepped closer to the door and pressed his ear against the cold steel. He could hear wheels, a medical gurney, rolling fast, guards cursing under their breath, an alarm beeping somewhere nearby. Then a voice, a guard, shouted into his radio. "We found him in the vent. Block C. He's unresponsive. Repeat, we found him inside the duct." Shadow's breath froze midair. Inside the duct. Inside the ventilation. His legs felt weak for a moment, and he had to catch himself on the wall. He whispered to himself, "No, no way, that's impossible." But the radio crackled again, confirming it. A body, a real body, inside the same duct that whispered his name. Shadow began pacing his cell, hands on his head. That vent wasn't designed for a grown man. No adult could fit through it. The duct was barely wide enough to push a pillow through. The idea that an inmate could crawl in there didn't justify logic. It violated every physical limitation of the SHU's construction. A guard yelled, "Move! Move! We're losing him." Another, "Who released him into the system? Who signed the order?" A third voice shouted, "Nobody signed anything. This wasn't supposed to be possible." Shadow backed up into the corner, trying to understand what he was hearing. Guards scrambling. A man pulled from the ventilation. Paperwork missing. The system breaking down in a place built to be unbreakable. And then the power flickered again. The lights dimmed to a sickly yellow glow, buzzing like trapped insects. The air suddenly felt colder, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees in a single breath. The vent above him rattled again, and for a moment, Shadow considered yelling for the guards. But something inside him stopped him, a feeling deep in his gut, a warning, because as the guards rushed away with the body on the gurney, the footsteps fading, something else happened. The vent whispered again. But this time, the voice was different. Not tired, not weak, not begging. This voice was clear, focused. "They didn't find me." Shadow's heart skipped a beat. He stepped back toward the center of his cell, eyes locked on the vent. The whisper continued, calm, slow, almost confident. "They found someone else." A chill crawled up his spine. "Who are you?" he whispered. Silence. Then, "You already know." Shadow shook his head. No, I don't. Tell me who you are." The vent rattled again, as if something crawled just a few inches closer. "I was here before you. I've been watching, and they don't want you to know what I know." Shadow felt his throat tighten. "What do you want from me?" The voice paused, then said, "To help you survive." Shadow stared up, not blinking. "Survive what?" The answer came like a razor sliding across metal. "What's coming next?" And then, from somewhere far down the corridor, a siren began to wail, loud, urgent, the kind that meant lockdown or worse. Shadow took one step toward the steel door, listening, trying to understand what new danger had entered the SHU. And that's when he heard it. A scream, not an inmate scream, a guard's, echoing through the most secure unit, in the most secure prison in America, a place where screams are never supposed to happen. The siren grew louder, and Shadow knew the night wasn't over. Not even close. The scream echoed through the SHU like it was bouncing inside a metal coffin. Sharp, terrified, cut short. Shadow froze mid-step, staring at the steel door as the siren wailed overhead. Guards didn't scream inside Pelican Bay. It simply didn't happen. Not here, not in the SHU. This unit was built to keep officers safer than anyone else in the entire prison. Every movement was controlled. Every interaction was planned. Every door required multiple locks and keys. So hearing a guard scream, that meant something had broken through that order. Something powerful enough to shake the system. Shadow pressed his palms against the cold steel door, leaning in, listening. He could hear chaos spreading through the corridor. Radios crackling. Boots pounding the floor. Officers shouting codes and orders that made no sense. A loud conversation cut through the noise. Code 1. Medical emergency, C tier. I need backup. Who's down? Officer Hale. How? He was standing guard. We don't know. He just collapsed. Something hit him. Something? Shadow frowned. Something hit him? Guards didn't get hit inside the SHU. That wasn't how things worked. Inmates didn't have weapons. They didn't have access. They didn't even have enough space to move freely. No one could hit an officer unless the officer opened the door, which nobody did without 2 or 3 partners standing right beside them. Shadow stepped back, pacing, heart pounding. He whispered, "This can't be real. This can't be happening." Then, above him, the vent vibrated lightly, like someone slowly dragging their fingers across the metal from the inside. Shadow's eyes shot upward. The whisper returned. "Now you understand." Shadow clenched his fists. "Understand what?" "Talk to me." But instead of answering, the whisper shifted, moving, crawling. It slithered from above his cell to the next, then the next, traveling through the duct like a shadow sliding across a wall. Shadow could hear it moving down the entire tier, as if inspecting each cell, one by one. From down the line, an inmate named Gino suddenly shouted, "Yo! Who's in my vent? Get out of there!" Another inmate yelled, "This ain't funny. Stop playing." Someone far down the corridor began banging on their door, so loudly it vibrated the floor. "Guards! Somebody in the ducts!" I saw eyes. Shadow's breath stopped at that word. Eyes! The guards were already overwhelmed. Keys rattling. Radios buzzing. Officers rushing toward C-Tier. A senior officer, Sergeant Lopez, yelled, "Shut it down! Everyone lock in. We're on full tier freeze." The words tier freeze meant nobody moves, nobody speaks, nobody does anything until the situation is under control. But the inmates couldn't freeze. Not when they heard tapping, crawling, whispering. Not when they believed, even for a second, that something was inside the walls with them. Shadow backed up until he hit the rear concrete wall. He closed his eyes, trying to steady himself, but the screams outside wouldn't let him. Meanwhile, the guard's panic was getting worse. "Where's the camera feed?" "Offline." "What do you mean offline?" "System's glitching. We can't see anything inside C-Tier. Get maintenance up here now." The SHU was designed to be watched constantly, but tonight the cameras were shutting down one by one, like someone was flipping invisible switches. Shadow opened his eyes and looked up. The vent rattled again, this time harder, as if something heavy was resting against it. He whispered, barely breathing, "What are you?" No answer. Just a sudden, sharp tap right above his head. Tap, 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 3 taps. The same pattern. The same warning Bones wrote about months ago. Shadow swallowed hard. "Is that you in there? Are you the one they pulled out?" Silence. Then the whisper replied, "No." Shadow's stomach dropped. "They pulled out the wrong one," the voice finished. Before Shadow could respond, the entire SHU shook from a loud crash down the hallway. Metal slamming against metal like 2-cell doors had collided with full force. Guards shouted again, more frantic this time. "Hale is unconscious. He's bleeding. Get him out of here. We need restraints now." "What caused it?" "Someone pushed him." "Nobody touched him. His body just flew backwards." "Stop talking nonsense." Shadow listened closely, trying to catch every word. But behind the chaos, he heard something else, something colder. Whimpering. A guard was crying. Shadow had never heard that in all the years he'd been in SHU. Officers didn't show emotion. They didn't break. Yet one of them was sobbing quietly, voice trembling as he whispered into his radio. "I swear, something was in the vent. Something crawled past me." Shadow felt the blood drain from his face. Another crash. Another scream. Boots running. Radios exploding with overlapping voices. "Officer down. We need extraction. Lock all tiers now." Then a new voice. Deeper. Commanding. A supervisor. "Who opened the maintenance hatch?" Silence. A beat. "Nobody opened it." "Sir, it opened from the inside." Shadow stepped back. heart hammering so hard he could hear it echoing in his ears. From above him, the whisper spoke again, calm, steady, almost comforting now. This place was never built to keep us in. It was built to keep something else out. Shadow's skin crawled. "What are you talking about?" he whispered. The vent groaned. The whisper grew softer, like it was drifting farther away. "You'll see soon. You'll see when the lights go out again." Shadow closed his eyes. "No," he muttered. "No, they won't go out again. They fixed the power." But as soon as he said it, the lights flickered. Once, twice, buzzing, dimming. Then, without warning, click, the SHU went pitch black. And this time, they did not come back on. When the lights died, the darkness inside Pelican Bay's SHU felt alive. Not quiet, not empty, alive. Shadow stood frozen in the middle of his cell, letting the darkness swallow everything. When the power went out the first time, during the blackout in the hook, the emergency lights kicked in within seconds. But now, nothing. No glow, no backup, no hum from the overhead fluorescents. Only the distant, uneven beep of a failing generator somewhere deep in the facility. Shadow whispered into the void, "This isn't normal, this isn't normal." Then he heard them, dozens of inmates across the tiers shouting, banging on their doors, yelling for guards, cursing, panicking. The SHU wasn't designed for noise, and hearing so many voices at once was almost disorienting. Men who had spent years locked alone in concrete suddenly sounded like they were drowning. And underneath all of it, Shadow heard something far worse. Scratching. Not loud, not aggressive, more like something testing the surface of the duct, like nails gliding across the metal. Slow, deliberate. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Shadow closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. He could feel the darkness pressing against him, thick and suffocating. He whispered, Okay, calm down. You've been in the dark before. You can handle this." But this wasn't the same darkness he lived with every night. This wasn't the familiar pitch black of a SHU cell after lights out. This darkness felt heavier, like it had weight, like it was watching. Footsteps thundered down the corridor, guards moving fast. Shadow pressed his ear to the door, listening with everything he had. Officers shouted orders over each other. "Check the breakers." "I did. They're tripped but won't reset." "Where's the backup unit?" "It won't start." "You're telling me the generator and the emergency power are both down?" "Yes, sir. Something's wrong with the wiring." Shadow stepped back, whispering, "Something's wrong with more than the wiring." A loud bang cut through the darkness. Something slamming against metal. Then another bang. Then bang. As if someone was hitting the tier gate with full force. Guards cursed, boots scrambling. Another voice, this one scared. Sir, the motion sensors are going off. All of them." Shadow stiffened. Motion sensors. The SHU had dozens of them. They were designed to detect movement in the hallways, the common areas, the mechanical rooms, the perimeter. If all of them were triggering, that meant something was moving everywhere at once. A supervisor barked. "Visual feed? Where's the visual feed?" A tech yelled back, voice shaky. "All cameras offline." All of them. It's like the system got wiped. Shadow felt a cold pulse run down his spine. Cameras, wiped, then the scratching above him changed. It became faster, closer, like something was crawling toward him. Shadow looked up, even though he couldn't see anything in the dark. His breathing grew heavier. "Don't do this, don't come in here." The inmates on the tier were getting louder, some yelling to be let out, others yelling to be moved, others praying under their breath. Then, a sudden, sharp clang shook the entire ventilation duct above Shadow's head. It sounded like something slammed against the metal from inside. Shadow jumped back, heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. Then, a voice, clear, calm, whispering through the vent. "They can't help you now." Shadow clenched his jaw. "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" The whisper slid through the darkness like a knife through fabric. "I'm not doing anything." I'm surviving. Shadow swallowed hard. Surviving what? What's happening out there? No response. Then the voice changed. Not louder, sharper. More focused. You're listening to the wrong sounds. Shadow frowned. What are you talking about? The whisper replied. Listen deeper. Shadow didn't understand until he stopped listening to the shouting, the sirens, the guards, the footsteps, the banging, and he focused on the background, the low background. There was something underneath the noise, something he hadn't noticed. Breathing. Deep, slow, steady breathing. Not from a person in a cell, not from the hallway, from inside the duct. Shadow stepped backward until his shoulder blades hit the concrete wall. No, that can't be real. The breathing grew louder, more deliberate, like whatever was inside the duct was now directly above him. In the pitch-black silence, Shadow could hear every inhale, every exhale. Slow, heavy, too heavy to be human. Then, thud, something inside the vent dropped. Hard, like it landed on its hands and knees. Shadow covered his mouth to stop himself from yelling. The breathing continued. Inhale, exhale, then came the softest whisper yet, barely audible, yet somehow echoing to the entire cell like it was inside his ear. Shadow. He froze. The voice wasn't coming from the vent anymore. It was coming from behind him, inside the cell. Shadow spun around in the darkness, heart exploding with fear. But before he could move, a blinding white light suddenly flooded the tier, bright as a camera flash. Every inmate on the tier screamed and covered their eyes. Shadow stumbled backward. The lights were back, full power. But the second the brightness settled, Shadow looked up at his vent. It was bent. The metal cover was pushed outward, like something inside had tried hard to break through, and in the dust on the vent surface, someone had drawn a symbol, a perfect circle, with a single line running through the middle. Shadow stared at it, breath shaking, pulse racing. What does that mean? He didn't have to wait long, because seconds later, from the next cell over, Bones yelled, It's a marking. Whoever has the circle. They're next. Shadow's blood ran cold, and before he could even process what was happening, something hammered the vent again. Hard. The hammering against the vent thundered to the cell like a heartbeat amplified through steel. Each impact sent vibrations down the concrete walls and into Shadow's bones. He stared upward, teeth clenched, knowing that this wasn't just noise. This was something trying to get through. Bang, bang, bang. The circle carved into the dust of the vent seemed to vibrate with each hit, like the symbol itself was waking up. Shadow backed away slowly, eyes locked on the metal that was bending outward more and more with each strike. He whispered, Stop. Please stop. But whatever was inside the duct didn't care about please, or fear, or logic, and it definitely didn't care about the rules of the SHU. The banging stopped. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. It stretched out so long that Shadow wondered if it was waiting for him to move, waiting for him to talk, waiting for him to acknowledge it. Then, from the other side of the tier, an inmate named Harlan Tate started yelling. Harlan had been in the SHU since 2007, a man built like he'd been carved from iron, a man who had survived riots, stabbings, and lockdowns without ever showing fear. But tonight, in the glow of the newly restored lights, Harlan sounded terrified. Guards, look at my door. Look at it. Shadow turned toward the sound. The entire tier erupted as inmates fought to look out their food ports, banging for staff attention. Guards rushed down the corridor, Officer Davis at the front, followed by Sergeant Lopez, both looking exhausted, shaken, and drenched in sweat. They stopped at Harlan's door. Lopez yelled, What's the emergency now? Harlan shouted, Look at it, look at it. His voice cracked, something no one had heard from him before. Lopez leaned in and froze. Shadow couldn't see from his angle, not until Davis whispered, Oh my God! Shadow felt a chill slide down his arms. Harlan slammed his fists into the steel from inside. I didn't do that. You hear me? I didn't do that. Shadow strained to listen. Something was written across Harlan's cell door. Deep scratches dug straight into the metal. At first, Shadow couldn't make out the exact words, until Davis spoke again, this time louder, voice trembling. It says, "I saw you." Shadow felt his knees weaken. Harlan backed away from the door, panic rising. "I didn't write that. I didn't touch that door. I was sleeping. Somebody, something, carved it from the outside." Lopez stepped back like the metal itself was contaminated. No inmate could scratch through steel like that. Davis swallowed. "Then who did?" Harlan yelled. "Ask the thing in the vent." Shadow felt the words hit him like a punch, because the vent above his own cell was still bent outward, still marked, still humming with the echo of whatever was inside it. The guards tried regaining control. Lopez shouted for quiet, demanded order, threatened disciplinary write-ups that meant nothing in the chaos of that moment. But the unit didn't calm down. If anything, the fear spread like wildfire. Inmate voices stacked on top of each other. "It's in the walls. I heard it crawling. It touched me through the vent. Something breathed on me, I swear." I saw a face. Shadow pressed his palms to his ears, trying to drown out the flood of panic. But panic wasn't something you could block in SHU. It passed through the walls like electricity. Then, crash! A sound exploded from down the hall. Metallic, heavy, like a massive gate slamming shut or breaking loose. Guards sprinted toward the noise. Shadow pressed against the door, listening hard. Lopez shouted, "What broke?" A rookie guard yelled back, terrified, "The maintenance hatch!" It fell open. Davis responded quickly, "It shouldn't fall. It has 4 bolts. It takes tools to open." The rookie cut him off. IT opened by itself. Shadow's heart slammed against his ribs. He whispered, "Oh no, oh no." The rookie guard's voice cracked as he continued yelling, and something ran into the crawl space. I heard it running. The entire tier went deadly silent. Even the inmates stopped yelling. Lopez stepped forward slowly. "Running? You're sure?" The rookie swallowed hard. "Yes, fast, like a person, but heavier." Shadow closed his eyes. He could feel the vent above him vibrating again, softly, like a pulse. He whispered to himself, "This isn't real, this can't be real." Then the whisper returned, but this time not from the vent, from inside the cell again. "Shadow, the circle wasn't made for you." Shadow spun around. "What do you want?" The whisper grew stronger. "It was made to warn you." Shadow shook his head. "Warn me about what?" The air shifted, colder, sharper, like something moved in the space with him. The thing they found in the vent was running from something else. Shadow's breath shortened. He whispered, "From what?" The whisper paused, long enough for Shadow to feel dread crawling down his spine, then answered, "From the one that marked you." Shadow stepped backward until he hit the far wall. He whispered, "Mark me for what?" A sound behind him, the softest sound, like someone breathing just inches from his neck. Shadow didn't turn, couldn't turn. Then a voice, not a whisper, a presence, exhaled warm air across his shoulder and spoke in a slow, chilling tone. For the next one they take. Shadow's body froze, every muscle locked, and outside his cell, down the hallway, another officer screamed, loud, pure terror. And then it went silent, completely silent, as if the entire SHU was holding its breath. The silence that followed the guard scream was so complete it felt unnatural, like the entire SHU had stopped breathing at the same time. Even the inmates, who minutes earlier were panicking, shouting, and banging on their doors, fell quiet. It wasn't the silence of calm. It was the silence of fear, the kind that drops onto a room like a heavy cloth, smothering every thought. Shadow stood in the darkness of his cell, muscles locked, heart thundering like it wanted to break out of his chest. He could still feel warm breath on the back of his neck, even though he knew nobody could physically be inside the cell with him. The SHU doors were 6 inches thick. The vents were too small for a man. The concrete was solid, and yet something had been standing inches behind him, whispering to him. He forced himself to turn slowly, inch by inch, until he was facing the center of the cell again. Nothing, just empty air. But the emptiness didn't reassure him. In Pelican Bay's SHU, emptiness was the most dangerous thing of all. It meant your mind had space to fill in the shadows. Outside his door, guards were beginning to regroup. Shadow could hear Lopez shouting orders again, his voice strained but trying to sound authoritative. Check the east side. Secure all access points. Nobody moves alone. Officer Davis responded breathlessly. Hale is gone. He was standing right there, and now he's gone. Shadow felt the blood drain from his face. Gone. Not injured. Not unconscious. Gone. Lopez snapped back. People don't just disappear. But doubt trembled in his tone. The night's events had shattered every assumption about what was possible inside the SHU. Another officer yelled down the hall. Sir, we found something. Lopez demanded. What is it? Speak up. The guard hesitated, voice trembling. It's Officer Hale's vest. It's ripped open, like someone slashed it from the inside. Davis cursed under his breath. That's impossible. The material doesn't tear like that. But before he could finish his sentence, something heavy hit the floor above them. A deep, resonant thud. The inmates all gasped at once. Shadow felt the impact vibrate through the concrete beneath his feet. It didn't sound like a person collapsing. It sounded like something massive landing after a long drop. Lopez shouted, What's on the second level? A voice near him stuttered. Taste the ventilation. That's where it... The officer never finished. A loud metallic scrape ripped through the ceiling, long and low, like claws dragging across steel. Dust drifted down from the vents. Shadow covered his head as particles rained over him. He stared upward, heart pounding. Then the whisper returned. Not in his cell, not through the vent, from everywhere at once. Shadow. His blood froze. You heard the breathing. You saw the mark. You felt the presence. Shadow whispered shakily. What do you want from me? The voice softened, almost sympathetic. To prepare you. Prepare me for what? He asked. The vent creaked. A shadow moved across the grate. The lights flickered, and the whisper answered. For the moment the walls open, and you see what we've been surviving alone. Shadow backed up slowly until his spine pressed against the rear wall. His breathing quickened, but he didn't dare look away from a vent. Another deep thud echoed above them. Someone, or something, was walking in the crawlspace between tiers. Guards began backing away, some stepping behind others for protection. Their radios crackled with interference, spitting static and fragments of incomplete reports. Movement, north side, unidentified, lost visual. Then a rookie guard yelled, Sir, the circle. It's appearing on more vents. Shadow glanced at his sides. Cell after cell, one by one, perfect circles with a line through them appeared in the dust on the vents. Some inmates screamed. Others fell silent. Some prayed. Shadow whispered, What does it mean? Why are there more? The whisper answered, Because the first mark was a warning. The next marks are the countdown. Countdown to what? Shadow demanded, voice finally breaking. A sound echoed through the ducts. A vibration. A slow, heavy crawl heading directly toward him. Thump, thump, thump. Closing in. Guard shouted, Move! Move! Secure the tier. Shut the hatches. But they weren't fast enough. With a violent metallic crack, a vent 3 cells down buckled inward like someone had punched it from above. Bolt snapped. Metal bent. An inmate screamed. Shadow staggered forward, grabbing the edge of his steel bunk to steady himself. The whisper, now louder, more urgent, filled the entire tier. Shadow, it's coming through. He whispered, What is? The whisper replied, the one they tried to keep out. Before Shadow could react, the lights exploded. A shower of sparks rained from the ceiling. Every bulb on the tier shattered at once. Darkness swallowed everything again. And in that darkness, a new sound emerged. Not crawling, not scratching, not whispering, breathing. Deep, guttural, inhuman breathing. right outside his cell. The SHU of Pelican Bay was built to control the most dangerous men in America, gang leaders, killers, masterminds. A place designed with one purpose: to break the human mind without ever touching the human body. But on nights like this, it became clear the SHU wasn't only breaking inmates, it was breaking reality. Shadow stood alone in the darkness, heart racing, as something massive breathed inches away from him. Something that shouldn't exist behind steel and concrete. Something that moved through the vents like it owned them. Something that marked inmates with symbols no one understood. For years, officers believed they controlled the SHU. For years, inmates believed they were trapped inside it. But now, as the lights failed, as guards vanished, as circles spread across the vents like warnings from another world, one truth became impossible to ignore. Nobody knew what truly lived inside Pelican Bay's walls. Shadow thought the SHU was end of the world, a place where men were forgotten. But this night showed him something darker. He wasn't alone. He was never alone. And whatever shared this place with him was done hiding. As the breathing outside his cell grew louder and louder and louder, Shadow closed his eyes and realized the worst part. He still didn't know if the thing coming for him was trying to kill him or trying to save him.